Prejudice often wears the uniform of authority. On a lonely Virginia highway, two officers confront a black woman driving alone, assuming she's powerless behind the wheel of a government-grade Charger. Her calm compliance seems passive, a sign she'll quietly endure intimidation. They don't know she's Colonel Maya Trenton, a covert intelligence officer whose silence conceals a formidable resolve. Their aggression escalates quickly, culminating in a gunshot they believe erases their problem. But Maya survives. The bullet meant to silence her instead ignites her hidden strength, transforming her from an anonymous victim into a relentless force set on exposing their corruption. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The sun was still hanging high when Colonel Maya Trenton left Fort Greystone, its squat, concrete silhouette shrinking in the rear view as she merged onto Route 19. Late afternoon stretched across the Virginia countryside in thick bands of amber and shadow, the trees lining the road throwing long, flickering silhouettes across the hood of her Charger. The air was heavy, summer humidity clinging to the windows even as the AC kept the cabin cool. She rolled her shoulders once, then settled back into her seat, letting her thoughts run loose for the first time all day. The briefing had gone long, longer than planned. High-clearance meetings always did. Too many generals trying to outmaneuver one another with polished silence. But beneath the surface-level reports, the classified projections and the half-coded discussions, one thing had become unmistakably clear. Something was festering in the country's security forces, not abroad, not in some distant insurgency. Here, at home. And it wasn't just a few bad apples. They were looking at something organized, something growing. Her role in this wasn't supposed to be public. It wasn't even supposed to exist on paper. Assigned to the Joint Counter-Infiltration Division, Maya was tasked with tracking, identifying, and dismantling extremist efforts embedded inside domestic institutions. For the last several months, that had meant law enforcement. She didn't wear her uniform when she left the base. She didn't flash credentials unless it was necessary. Most people who met her had no idea they were speaking to a full-bird colonel. That anonymity had kept her alive more than once. Her car, too, was fitted for discretion. Civilian plates, blacked-out windows, no visible markings. Nothing to draw attention, at least in theory. The plates were tied to a Department of Defense shell company and would flag in any serious system as restricted access, not criminal. Still, it wasn't unusual for local officers to get curious or overzealous when they saw a black woman alone in a high-end government-grade vehicle on a rural backroad. She wasn't in a rush. There was time before she had to be back in D.C. The car moved at a steady speed. Windows cracked just enough to pull in a hint of pine from the woods on either side. She tapped the steering wheel absently, mentally reviewing audio logs from the encrypted drive hidden beneath the console. Then she noticed the cruiser. It came up behind her around the bend. White, spotless, probably state-level by the way it was holding formation. No lights, no horn, just presence. She checked her mirror, adjusted slightly in her lane. The cruiser matched her move. A slow, silent dance. The lights finally flashed about 30 seconds later, red and blue bouncing off her rear view with that unmistakable command. She took a breath and guided the Charger to the shoulder, easing it into the gravel without any sign of tension. She'd been through this kind of thing before. It usually went one of two ways, brief and awkward, or long and intrusive. But this road was isolated, the trees thick and close. No passing traffic, no eyes. The window lowered. The late-day sun slipped in, warm and golden, and she rested her hands on the wheel, fingers open, posture relaxed. Two officers stepped out of the cruiser, both white, one older, one younger. The younger one approached, chest puffed, one hand swinging loose while the other stayed just near his hip. His expression was already set. "Afternoon," he said, though it didn't sound like a greeting. "License and registration." Maya nodded once, reached slowly to the glove compartment, and retrieved the black folder she always carried for moments like this. No sudden moves, no raised tone. She'd played this out before, too many times. "Of course," she said calmly. "Can I ask why I was pulled over?" "Plates don't match the registry," he replied flatly, not even glancing down at the ID she handed over. "Could be stolen. Mind stepping out of the car for me?" She didn't move. "Officer, this vehicle is registered through a Department of Defense channel. The plates aren't supposed to match civilian systems. That's part of the clearance. You'll see that if you run it through the proper portal." His jaw shifted slightly, but not because he was confused. He just didn't like what she'd said. Or maybe he didn't like how she said it. His partner was standing at the rear now, pretending to look at her taillights, but clearly watching her through the reflection. The younger one tried again, this time with a little more push. "Step out of the car, ma'am." Maya kept her voice even. "I'm not refusing to cooperate, but I haven't been given a lawful reason to exit my vehicle. My identification is valid, and I've just explained the plate situation. I'm invoking my right to remain in the vehicle unless formally detained." The officer looked down at her, then over at his partner, then back again. He smiled, but there was nothing friendly in it. The smile lingered on his face for just a second longer than it needed to. Not amused, not even irritated, just full of that smug, performative calm that people wore when they believed authority was absolute and untouchable. He straightened, nodded once to his partner, and took a slow half-step back from the window, as if granting her a courtesy that hadn't been earned. "All right then," he said, voice laced with a practiced civility that felt more like a dare than a compromise. "If you're going to make this difficult, we'll do it by the book." His partner moved closer now, still near the tail light, but no longer pretending to check anything. His posture shifted slightly, weight coming off the back foot, right hand resting deliberately over the butt of his holstered weapon. The tension wasn't overt, not yet, but it had thickened the air around them. There was no attempt to de-escalate, no second request, just silence and proximity. The first officer stepped forward again, now holding his radio loosely in one hand. "You got backup logged in the system?" he asked over his shoulder. "Logged and cleared," the partner replied without missing a beat. "Body cams running." Maya didn't believe that for a second. Neither man had made any obvious moves to activate recording devices, and neither had referenced procedure when she first questioned the stop. If they were recording, it wasn't for transparency. It was insurance, against her, not for her. She kept her eyes forward, hands still visible on the steering wheel, breath steady even as her heart began to shift rhythm. The road was still empty. No cars had passed since the stop began. No witnesses, only trees, sky, and asphalt baking under the last light of the day. "Listen," the officer said again, leaning into the window. "You're not helping your case here. We've got a vehicle that doesn't match the registry, driver with no cooperating ID, refusing lawful commands." "I never refused," Maya interrupted, not sharply, but firmly. "I complied. I gave you identification. You haven't verified it. You're stalling. That's obstruction. It's not obstruction to ask for lawful clarification. You still haven't told me what system you ran the plates through or why you ignored a federal credential. You expect me to believe every stolen government vehicle out here belongs to somebody special? That ID wasn't printed in someone's basement. You could confirm it right now if you stopped pretending not to see it." That changed his posture. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping half a register, and whatever mask he had been wearing slipped just enough to show the contempt underneath. "You think your little folder makes you untouchable. You think just because you say you're someone, I'm supposed to treat you different? "I expect you to follow procedure," she said, her voice still composed, even as her pulse moved faster beneath her skin. "If that's too much, I'll wait here until someone with the proper clearance arrives." His nostrils flared slightly. Behind her, the second officer shifted again, moving closer, angling his approach so that he could watch both her hands and her face at the same time. He wasn't curious anymore. He was calculating. She knew that stance. She'd seen it overseas, when foreign checkpoint guards tried to decide whether to bribe, detain, or shoot. The first officer stepped back from the window, no longer pretending to engage in conversation. His voice, when it came again, was louder, calibrated for his partner rather than her. "She's non-compliant. Go ahead and open it up." Maya didn't raise her voice, but she did speak. "You touch that door, and you'll be in violation of—" "Get out of the car!" he snapped, cutting her off before she could finish. Now. The authority in his voice wasn't rooted in law or protocol. It was a command based on expectation, on a belief that no matter what she said or showed, she didn't belong in that car. Not on that road. Not in their world. And certainly not above their authority. She didn't move. Not out of defiance, but because moving first was the opening to losing control. Her hands remained on the wheel, steady and open, the folder still resting on the dashboard like a piece of evidence that no one intended to acknowledge. The air inside the car had grown hotter, or maybe it was just the way time felt slower now, as though the next few seconds were being stretched out before a fall. Somewhere beneath her feet, under the floor panel, the onboard recorder remained quietly active, its red LED blinking with perfect, dispassionate rhythm. Mather's hand dropped to the door handle without hesitation, fingers curling around it like it was his right, not a choice. He yanked it open in one practiced motion, the door swinging wide with the sound of tension breaking loose. Maya's body tensed. Her left arm shifted just slightly, elbow bending to guard her midsection as her shoulder turned instinctively toward him. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Every inch of her posture said, "This is wrong." But Mathers wasn't reading body language. He wasn't interested in negotiation or procedure. He was operating from that dull, fixed certainty, the kind that said this wasn't about safety or protocol or even control. It was about putting someone back in place. "Let's go," he said again, now with his hand inside the car, seizing her wrist like she wasn't a person but a problem he intended to remove. She didn't shout, didn't curse. Instead, she drew a controlled breath and anchored her feet. Her body twisted with practiced strength, not to strike, but to resist being yanked out of her own vehicle like a suspect in a back-alley sting. The seatbelt, already unclipped, slid off her shoulder as Mathers pulled harder, trying to haul her across the threshold. From the passenger side, Officer Voss moved in quickly, the sound of boots crunching against the gravel as he crossed behind the car. He didn't say a word, but the sound of a baton unhooking from his belt made itself heard loud and clear. Maya's heel caught on the lower frame of the door as she planted her leg. Her free hand came up, bracing against Mather's chest as his grip tightened. It wasn't a push. It was a boundary, but it didn't matter. "She's resisting," Voss said loudly as he rounded the car, coming up on her blind side. He didn't wait for Mathers to respond. He just grabbed her other arm and yanked. Maya's balance tipped. They didn't move like trained law enforcement executing a controlled detainment. They moved like two men escalating a situation because they'd already decided what they wanted it to be. Mathers pulled with more force, dragging her legs out of the vehicle until her boots hit the gravel shoulder with a jarring scrape. She twisted, trying to keep her footing, her knees buckling for a moment as the uneven ground pulled against her stance. The folder on the dashboard slipped, landing sideways in the passenger footwell with a soft thud. Neither of them noticed, or cared. "Stop pulling me like I'm a criminal," she snapped, her voice sharp now, controlled but cutting. She tried to plant her feet again, twisting her shoulder away from Voss's grip, And that's when the baton came out. It wasn't swung. Not yet. But it pressed across her back, pinning her between the two of them like they were herding cattle, not dealing with a federal officer. The weight of it pushed down across her spine, the pressure increasing with each step they forced her backward. Her body dipped, caught in a tangle of elbows, boots, and gravel. Mathers shoved forward with a grunt, trying to spin her fully toward the cruiser, but she locked her knees, digging into the loose stones with a grunt. One hand broke free just long enough to shove back into his chest. Not to strike, but to regain distance. And that was the trigger. "She's reaching!" Voss barked, voice rising, sharp, loud, unmistakably meant for the recorder that wasn't on his chest. It was a lie, delivered with the same cadence as truth. It didn't matter that her hands were empty. It didn't matter that there had been no sudden movement, no lunge, no glint of a weapon. The word had been spoken, and with it came permission. The gun was already in Mather's hand by the time she turned her head. She saw the glint of it. She knew the angle. She saw where it was pointed and how close he was. And she knew what was coming. The shot tore through her side at close range, a burning bolt that cracked through her ribcage and collapsed her knees. Her breath left her in one violent rush as her body folded, the gravel scraping across her palms as she went down hard, half inside the car, half on the shoulder. For a second, there was only ringing. No voices, no movement, just the weight of pain and dust in her mouth. Then, "Kyle, what did you do?" "She went for something." "There was nothing in her hands. You saw her move. She was trying to stand up, for Christ's sake." Mathers stepped back, one boot sliding awkwardly across the gravel. Voss stood frozen, baton still clutched in his right hand, face pale. Neither of them moved to cuff her. Neither of them checked for a weapon. They just stood there, adrenaline and silence stretching between them like a rope pulled too tight. Maya lay motionless for a moment, blood soaking through her shirt, pooling beneath her side in a slow, sticky bloom. Her mind was still working. Her vision blurred, then sharpened. She tried to breathe through the pain, through the heat radiating from her abdomen. She didn't cry out. She didn't ask for help. She just turned her head slightly, enough to catch the blinking red light on the floorboard beneath the console. Steady, quiet, dutiful. Still recording. Still transmitting. The fluorescent lights above her head were too clean, too controlled. Maya blinked against their brightness, her eyelids sluggish from medication, but not thick enough to dull the instinctual unease that had returned the moment her mind began to stitch memory back together. The sterile air smelled of antiseptic and vinyl, and somewhere close, machines beeped with mechanical patience. Her mouth was dry. Her side throbbed, not sharply, but like something vital had been torn and stitched without permission. She was alive. That fact settled in slowly, uncomfortably. The last thing she remembered clearly was the echo of gunfire and the hot gravel biting into her skin. Everything after that was a muddle of voices, pressure, motion, too many hands and too little choice. She turned her head just enough to scan the room. No windows, no hospital signage, no chart. The walls were an off-white that screamed institutional standard. Beside her was a chair with a black duffel tucked beneath it, unlabeled and military-issued. No visitors, no visible nurses. This wasn't a regular room. The door opened soundlessly, revealing two men in dark suits, neither of whom introduced themselves as they entered. They didn't need to. Their posture, their expressions, and their presence gave everything away. Intelligence. Internal. Not here to answer questions. "We're glad you're stable, Colonel," the taller one said, standing just past the edge of the bed. "You've been under watch since you were extracted." "Where am I?" she asked. voice raspy from disuse. "A military recovery unit outside Quantico," the second man replied. "Classified location. You were transferred as soon as the situation was flagged." "Which was when?" "Roughly 3 hours after you were admitted to the civilian trauma ward in Allegheny General. The civilian team logged you under Jane Doe. Gunshot wound. Internal bleeding. No identification. Local law enforcement submitted an incident report, marked it as a non-lethal discharge during detainment. You were tagged for transfer once flagged in the DoD biometric system." Maya stared at him, processing not the words, but the subtext. Her ID had been ignored. The vehicle had been seized, likely scrubbed or hidden under layers of internal security. The incident had been reduced to a line in a sealed record. And no one had asked for her version. "I want access to the footage," she said. The taller man didn't blink. "You're not in any legal jeopardy. The matter is being handled." "I didn't ask if it was being handled. I want the footage." He exchanged a glance with his colleague. The second man pulled a small tablet from a messenger bag and tapped through a set of encrypted access screens before handing it to her. Maya didn't thank him. She sat up, pain flaring under her ribs, and took it. The screen flickered to life. The camera angle opened on the charger's interior, her hands on the wheel, her voice calm. Everything captured, everything said, everything done. From the moment she was stopped to the second she hit the ground. She watched the moment Mathers grabbed her. She watched Voss shout his false accusation. She watched the flash of the muzzle, her body collapsing, the sound of her own blood hitting the gravel. They hadn't disabled the recorder. They hadn't even noticed it. And now, it was all preserved. "You're going to want to be careful with how you handle that data," the taller one said, as though advising her on a parking ticket. "The Joint Chiefs are aware of your condition and the footage. Command has recommended a full internal review, but no escalation." Maya looked up slowly. Her face betrayed nothing, but something behind her eyes shifted, quiet and cold. "So I'm being ordered to stand down." The man nodded once, without ceremony. "It's not the time, politically. Optics are complicated right now. There's no guarantee it would lead to any meaningful action, especially not if we want to preserve the operation already in motion. We believe the bigger threat still exists, and we don't want to jeopardize your prior intel trail. By ignoring an attempted murder on a federal officer? By minimizing exposure while we continue investigating broader targets? You were lucky. That's the recommendation." She nodded, just once, then handed the tablet back. The two men took their cue and left without further comment. She lay there for several minutes after the door clicked shut. The pain in her side had dulled again, but the ache under her ribs wasn't physical anymore. It was something else, something heavier. When the door opened next, it was Aisha Dawes. Her frame filled the doorway with the quiet weight of someone who'd been pacing outside for too long and had run out of patience. She was in uniform, her hair pulled tight, a scowl already forming as she closed the door behind her. "You almost died," Aisha said, skipping the greetings. "You know that?" "I'm aware," Maya said, sitting up straighter. "They covered it, not even a full page, marked it as accidental force response. I had to hack the dispatch log just to get your location." "I figured. I talked to someone inside the precinct. They locked the file before the ink dried. Officers Kyle Mathers and Bradley Voss. Internal review already closed. No charges. No inquiry. Nothing." Maya didn't respond. Her eyes drifted to the small cabinet beneath the wall-mounted monitor across the room. It was locked, probably holding her effects, if anything had been returned at all. "I'm guessing they're telling you to let it go," Aisha continued. "Let the system work. Let it move up the chain." "They did," Aisha folded her arms. You're not going to let it go. No, Maya said, her voice low but resolute. I'm going to build the case myself. She turned her gaze back to the ceiling, eyes tracing the seams in the paneling above her head. They think this was incidental, that it was just two idiots on the side of the road pulling a bad stop. Aisha didn't reply. Maya's voice dropped further, cold and controlled. But I was on assignment, following threads they don't want traced. That wasn't random. They were trying to erase something. She turned to Aisha fully now, her posture straighter than it should have been given the pain. I need a secure server, a burner laptop, and access to the local traffic logs from the last 48 hours. Start with every cruiser within 10 miles of Route 19. We'll move from there. Aisha didn't ask why. She just nodded, turned, and left the room. And Maya, now alone again, allowed herself one long exhale before reaching slowly toward the drawer. Whatever the next move was, it would be hers. It had started 6 months earlier, in a room with no name, deep in the sublevels of a joint command facility outside D.C. There were no cell phones allowed, no recording devices, and no paper trails. The walls were bare concrete, thick enough to muffle classified conversations. Maya had taken her seat in front of a single table, across from a screen displaying a rotating archive of badge numbers, precincts, and personnel files. Each one marked with the same digital watermark. Sentinel activity, unverified threat vector. The man leading the briefing was a senior analyst from Fort Meade, but even he didn't give his name. What he did give was a summary that had stayed lodged in the back of Maya's mind ever since. There's a pattern emerging, he had said. It doesn't live in one state. It lives in the silence between departments. Affiliations hidden in private forums, shared language, shared ideology, shared purpose. And the scary part isn't the fringe operators. It's the ones who've been promoted. The screen shifted. A map appeared, national scale, peppered with red dots across counties and cities. Not concentrated, spread, embedded, intentional. We believe multiple law enforcement agencies have been quietly penetrated by ideological extremists operating under a cohesive umbrella. Decentralized but connected. They're not just sharing memes or swapping rhetoric. They're aligning policy, recommending each other for internal promotions, scrubbing background checks. They're building a lattice under the surface. Think termites, not wolves. That was the moment Maya had agreed to take the assignment. Her orders were unofficial and compartmentalized, given under the table, but with the quiet blessing of those who still believed in the system they served. Her mission was to gather intelligence, map the scope, and feed targets to internal security branches discreetly. But that was then, before Route 19, before the gunshot, before she understood just how deep the rot ran. Now, sitting alone at a secure terminal Aisha had delivered 2 days after the incident, Maya reviewed the classified mission logs she had managed to salvage from the Black Archive, data she was never supposed to see again. A bullet had forced her out of the operation, so now she would rebuild it on her own terms. The screen blinked once as a new encrypted message appeared, originating from a secure connection traced through 5 virtual routers across Europe. It was Jonah Reeves. The message was simple. Traffic spike. Precinct 2A. 2 nodes you flagged. Moving to voice. Stand by. Moments later, her secondary comm lit up with a brief pulse, then static, then Jonah's familiar, unbothered voice. I was halfway through a container of pad Thai and a bad rerun of Justified when your flagged endpoint lit up like a Christmas tree, he said, casual as ever. Encryption type was homemade, probably something passed down through one of those private chat forums you mentioned in your last intel drop. Took me longer than I'd like to admit to strip it. And? Maya asked, her fingers still scrolling through precinct staffing logs. And someone inside your favorite little sheriff's office just sent a heavily obfuscated data packet to an external proxy that routes through West Virginia, then bounces to Panama. She paused. That proxy ring belongs to the feeder server I flagged last month. Jonah whistled. Well, you're ahead of me. What's our keyword filter say? Reseed batch 5, she said. And one tagged name, Red House. There was a brief silence. Jonah wasn't easily rattled, but she could feel the shift in his tone when he replied. That's a cue phrase. You're dealing with active coordination, not just signal chatter. They're updating operational posture. I know, Maya said, closing the log. And before you ask, he continued, yes, I traced the IP signature of the outbound device. It came from a municipal server at Precinct 2A. The same office where Kyle Mathers is currently listed as reinstated without conditions. Maya's jaw clenched, but she didn't speak. You sure you want to keep this under the radar? Jonah asked carefully. Because I'm telling you, whatever this is, it's spreading. You're not just chasing a dirty cop, you're chasing the mechanism. I don't need official clearance to remove a threat, she replied. I need clarity. You just gave me the first piece. Jonah exhaled. Copy that. I'll keep watching the threads. They're getting twitchy. She ended the call without ceremony. 2 hours later, in a small diner 30 miles outside Richmond, Detective Carla Montenegro sipped her third cup of coffee, eyes scanning the anonymous envelope left on the seat beside her. She hadn't seen who dropped it off, just found it sitting there when she came back from the restroom. Inside, a black thumb drive, a typed one-page summary marked confidential, and a note that read, You once cared about the truth. I hope that hasn't changed. Carla had spent 23 years in internal affairs. She'd seen good officers collapse under pressure, bad ones rise with protection, and entire precincts rally to defend the indefensible. She'd been called every name in the book, had her tires slashed, her family threatened, and her career boxed in a dozen times. But even now, even after everything, her instinct still flickered when something didn't sit right. She slid the drive into her tablet. The screen came alive with a set of files. Names, badge numbers, text logs, time-stamped clips of encrypted messages between officers. It wasn't enough to convict, but it was enough to start asking the kind of questions that made careers unravel. And there, in the middle of it all, the file tagged with the name she hadn't expected to see again. Kyle Mathers. She narrowed her eyes. The precinct's internal review had cleared him within 48 hours. No public statement, no media alert. Just a quiet memo and a return-to-duty order. She leaned back in the booth, watching the room casually. She didn't know who had sent her the package, but she had a strong suspicion it was someone who wasn't asking for permission anymore. Back in her rented apartment, Maya watched a grainy live stream of the precinct's internal garage. She saw Mathers walk out at shift change, smug and unscarred, as if nothing had ever happened. She leaned forward, fingers hovering above the keyboard, and opened a new folder. Subject: Mathers, Kyle. Primary point of penetration. Secondary targets: Voss, Bradley. Collusion: Montenegro, Carla. Potential asset. Objective: infiltrate the infiltrators. The system had made its choice. Now she was making hers. The data had been drifting in patterns for weeks, unremarkable on the surface, like the low tide before a storm. Standard departmental chatter, vague radio relays, transfers between precinct servers. But under Jonah's filters, under the tools only a former NSA codebreaker knew how to calibrate, something darker began to pulse in the data streams. Maya watched from her laptop as his cursor glided across a digital map patched together with satellite overlays and geotagged communication nodes. Each red mark represented a flagged communication from a known or suspected extremist keyword set, terms they had spent months compiling from closed forums, whistleblower testimony, and decommissioned server leaks. It wasn't enough to convict anyone outright, but patterns had a rhythm, and rhythm told the truth. They've been using departmental terminals to mask lateral transmissions, Jonah said, his voice smooth but clipped with focus as he shifted the map southwest, zooming in on a cluster of repeat flags in a rural zone just outside Staunton, Virginia. Encrypted packets leave from internal networks, hop 3 times, and land on a private server outside municipal reach. The final destination is always a dead-end point. Until today. Maya leaned in. You caught a live connection? Jonah nodded. For exactly 9 minutes this morning. 2 users engaged in what looks like a confirmation exchange. Text only, no images or files. And one of those users matches an alias we already had eyes on from the Route 19 scan. He opened the chat log. Maya read it once, silently, then again, slower. Red line confirmed. Initiate Crimson Protocol. Crimson House prepped. Batch seeded. 2 reserves pending. Monday rendezvous. Circle firm. No leaks. Sentinels watch. Orders hold. Maya didn't blink. Black North 92 is Mathers. Jonah looked up from the screen. You're sure? That was the name his old training unit used for encrypted drills. I saw the pattern on a previous operation in Louisiana. Someone tried to wipe it, but the signature remained embedded in archived memory. It's him. And Sentinels of Order? That's a network name. It's not just rhetoric. This is their structure. Jonah exhaled slowly, turning the screen back toward himself. That makes this Crimson House a real-world staging point. Maya nodded. And a secure enough facility that they're using it as a rendezvous site for multiple contacts. Jonah keyed in a trace, feeding the chat metadata into a cross-referenced location analysis. Best guess? He said, watching the results populate. Crimson House sits just outside the southern grid of Staunton. No visible address, but there's an unregistered property in the tax ledger, paid in full, no bank trail, listed to a private foundation out of Montana. 50-acre lot, single structure, gated. Flagged once last year for excessive gunfire reports. No follow-up. Maya stood from her chair, stretching her ribs gently, the pain still a dull echo under her skin. We need eyes on it. Jonah hesitated. This is a full exfiltration level site, Maya. If they're using this place for meetings and seeding ops, it won't be passive. You'll need a team. I don't need a team, she said, already pulling a burner phone from her jacket. I need Aisha. The surveillance began at dusk. Maya and Aisha sat in a decommissioned recon van, purchased off-books from a defense logistics surplus auction, parked half a mile down a gravel path obscured by overgrowth and unmaintained fencing. The woods here weren't thick, but they were private. The kind of rural sprawl that allowed certain kinds of men to train without oversight. Through a long-range lens, Maya tracked movement inside the Crimson House, an elongated 2-story farmhouse set back from the road, window glass blacked out, roof reinforced with flat metal sheets. There was a flag out front, not American, not military. A red field with a black crest in the shape of a spiked cross. They've got night vision guards rotating every 45 minutes, Aisha said, noting the 3rd perimeter sweep. And 2 stationary watch points with visible rifles. No drones, no exterior cameras. They're trained for isolation, not detection. Standard paramilitia setup, Maya said. But it's not militia culture I'm seeing. It's cell discipline. That house isn't just a gathering spot. It's an operational node. Inside, figures moved through the main room. At least 5 visible, all men, all wearing civilian clothes. One worked at a desk with a tablet. Another rolled a crate across the hardwood floor. A third exited with a backpack and got into a rusted black SUV, which turned onto the gravel road and drove north without headlights. Aisha watched through the second lens. "You think this is where they're running logistics from?" Maya's voice dropped. "It's more than that. This is where they coordinate replacements, training packets, propaganda seeding. We're not watching a base. We're watching a nerve center." She checked her watch. "Give me the satellite window." 18 minutes, Aisha said. "After that, the thermal pass ends for the night." "More than enough." Maya keyed into Jonah's secure line. "Target verified, Crimson House confirmed. I'm marking entry points, escape routes, and thermal dead zones. Begin server trace on outbound vehicle, black SUV, no plates, probable signal jump drive on board." Jonah responded immediately. "On it. Packet trace initiating now." Maya leaned back against the seat, her thoughts moving faster than the equipment. Mathers hadn't just rejoined the department. He had been promoted, put on a new unit under an oversight shield designed to be impenetrable from outside audit. And now, here he was, coordinating with a verified extremist cell at a hidden property less than 4 hours from his assigned precinct. This wasn't a rogue officer. This was someone embedded in a network, with full departmental cover, operating like a covert asset. And the network wasn't only intact, it was evolving. She reached down and slid open the case beneath her feet. Inside, a drone with infrared capability, preloaded flight paths, and a jamming-resistant signal relay. She powered it up without hesitation. The drone launched silently into the night air, its lights off, the blades whispering as it rose above the trees. Below it, the Crimson House glowed faintly under the thermal sweep, like a lung drawing in breath before something worse. Maya's voice was steady as she spoke into the headset. "Crimson House is active. Begin documentation protocol. We raid within 72 hours. The drone fed back high-resolution thermal data, rendering the Crimson House in hues of soft orange and deep red, like a living body glowing from within. From above, it resembled an isolated organ pulsing in the dark, a center of heat and motion far removed from the quiet sprawl of the surrounding countryside. Inside the recon van, the atmosphere had shifted from tension to calculation. Everyone was locked in, silent, focused, moving through checklists and visual confirmations. Maya stood behind the monitor bank, eyes fixed on the thermal overlays, while her fingers tapped through audio feeds transmitted through the drone's secondary relay. Next to her, Aisha sat at a secondary station, plotting movement paths, noting watch rotations, and mapping blind spots. Behind them, 2 members of the Black Ops unit out of Leavenworth, a favor called in from a friend who owed Maya far more than a phone call, reviewed schematics overlaid with combat ingress routes. These weren't typical soldiers. They were unlisted operators, names pulled from unofficial rosters, chosen for their precision and discretion. If the order came, they'd move, and they wouldn't miss. Target population currently at 9 warm bodies inside structure, Aisha reported without looking up. 2 more sweeping the perimeter every 20 minutes. No dogs, no drones, but they're using proximity alarms. Hardwired, not cellular. They know how to keep quiet. Jonah's voice cut through the radio line from his secure terminal in D.C. "I've tapped one of the internal relays they're using to broadcast among devices. Looks like a private mesh network. Mostly encrypted burst messages. They go dark during rotation checks, resync every 45 minutes. "Intercept anything?" Maya asked, shifting her gaze to the satellite feed on the upper monitor. "Just pulled one 10 minutes ago. No names, but the phrasing fits the Sentinel pattern. Listen to this." There was a pause, followed by Jonah playing back a clipped audio burst. Male voices, heavily compressed, speaking in short, sharp phrases. "Confirmed batch. Local assets ready. Phase 3 starts Sunday. Routes covered. Backup from Blue Shield confirmed." The feed clicked off. Jonah's voice returned, quieter this time. They're coordinating something with law enforcement. A Blue Shield protocol shows up in 2 other flagged conversations from last week. I think it means complicit officers are already in place, likely prepped for interference or extraction. Maybe more. Aisha frowned, glancing at Maya. Could be a second hit, or a staged confrontation. If they're syncing up like this, it's not just about hiding. They're moving. Maya didn't speak right away. Her eyes stayed on the drone feed as it passed slowly over the southern flank of the house, revealing a structure she hadn't noticed before. A smaller building, barely the size of a storage shed, sat near the edge of the tree line. Thermal picked up 4 warm bodies inside, 2 larger and 2 smaller. Their positions didn't shift much. She leaned in, squinting. Zoom on auxiliary structure. Rear elevation. The operator beside her adjusted the drone, tightening the camera's view until the outlines of the occupants became clearer. 1 adult standing. 1 sitting. 2 child-sized heat signatures huddled together on the far wall. Aisha's breath caught beside her. Are they holding children in there? No visible restraints, the operator murmured, but they haven't moved in over 10 minutes. Could be using them as soft cover, Aisha said. Insurance. Or indoctrinating them, Maya added quietly, her voice flat with something far colder than shock. She stepped away from the console and moved to the small tactical table in the corner of the van. On it sat the sealed mission kit. Blank patches, encrypted comms, field med injectors. She unzipped it slowly and laid her palm on the matte black vest inside. Her fingers tightened for a moment. Their patterns changed, she said, not as observation, but conclusion. They're escalating timelines. Whatever Phase 3 is, it's not weeks away. It's days. And now we've got possible miners on site, a local operation syncing with embedded law enforcement, and a command chain we've barely mapped. Aisha turned in her seat. You're not going to wait for formal authorization, are you? Maya looked over her shoulder. You want to tell Washington we sat on a domestic extremist cell coordinating with cops and possibly using children as shields? The silence was enough. She didn't need agreement. She just needed clarity. She keyed into Jonah's channel again. Scramble facial capture from any satellite drift over the last 2 hours. I want ID matches pulled and stacked in tiers. Red, yellow, green. Give me a list of any flagged licenses that passed within 10 miles of this grid since sundown. Jonah didn't hesitate. Working now. Maya faced the team. This doesn't go up the chain. We do this clean, surgical, and contained. If we wait, they'll vanish. The Leavenworth lead, a quiet operator named Garrison, nodded once. You want breach or surround? Surround. Slow crawl. Infrared clearance only. We isolate and neutralize, recover anyone not hostile, and secure all digital assets on site. Anything on a drive comes with us. Anything with a signal gets blocked before we move. And you're coming with us? Aisha said. Not a question. I'm not sitting this one out, Maya replied. I was supposed to dismantle them from the inside. That mission never changed. A pause settled in the van. The type of pause where nobody breathed louder than they had to. Outside, the trees stirred faintly in the night wind. The drone circled once more, quiet above it all, still watching. Maya placed her hand flat on the table, eyes scanning the room. We hit them tomorrow night. No delay. No compromise. In the corner of the screen, the Crimson House flickered. Movement inside, a door swinging open, and 3 figures stepping out into the yard. One of them carried a rifle. Another, a satchel slung over his back, moved with the casual readiness of someone who expected no interruptions. Maya's gaze followed them as they disappeared into the shed. No one said anything more. The order had already been given. The moon was thin and veiled behind low clouds, as the convoy of 3 matte black vehicles rolled down the backwoods path, with headlights off and engines barely audible. Trees loomed on either side, reaching overhead like ribs forming a tunnel of bark and shadow. The approach was deliberate, every movement planned and rehearsed. No chatter over the comms, just position pings, encrypted bursts of light data, and breathing held in measured rhythm. Maya sat in the passenger seat of the lead vehicle, flanked by Garrison and two field operatives dressed in deep gray assault gear with no insignia. Her body armor felt heavy against the bandage still covering the wound in her side, but the pain had dulled into a background presence. Quiet, constant, tolerated. She reviewed the building layout one last time, mentally tracing each corridor, entry point, and fire zone. The Crimson House was about to come apart, and she was going to be in the middle of it. The vehicles halted at the staging point a quarter-mile out, and the team moved out on foot. 12 operators split into 3 columns, north, south, and rear access. Jonah, despite Maya's objections, had insisted on joining the field detail as tech support, claiming that if the network wasn't neutralized at the source, they'd be chasing phantoms for months. Through her thermal monocular, Maya could see the house glowing like a soft ember in the dark. Heat signatures clustered around the second-floor landing and main hall. The shed, now confirmed to house 2 children and 1 unarmed adult, was already being surrounded by a secondary team tasked with extraction and neutralization. Garrison's voice crackled through the comms, low and clipped. "Confirm entry points," Aisha responded from the rear flank. "South window, clear. No tripwires, no visual contact. Ready." Jonah, crouched behind a row of brush with a tablet wired to the drone's relay, added, "I'm seeing movement on the second floor. 2 armed walking patrol loop, 1 sitting. Looks like a command post set up at the far northwest room. Probably where they're staging intel." Maya nodded to herself and raised her voice just enough to be heard. "Team 1, breach on my mark. Teams 2 and 3 follow sweep pattern, north to center convergence. Jonah, you isolate the local mesh once we're inside. Lock them out." "Copy that," he replied. "Execute." The charges had already been placed. Silent plastic strip charges designed to cut without explosion. With a faint ripple of sound, the front entry door detached from its hinges and fell inward like a felled plank. The room beyond was dark, unnaturally so, walls painted black, windows sealed shut. The team moved fast, slicing the air with rifle-mounted lights, sweeping for immediate threats. "Clear!" Garrison called from point. Maya followed directly behind, stepping through the breach into a space that smelled of oil, sweat, and pine cleaner. The entry hall split into 2 staircases and a narrow passage to the right. From the upper floor came the first sign of awareness, a muffled shout, then hurried footsteps. "Contact! Upper landing!" a voice called over comms. Gunfire erupted a second later, tight bursts, not panic fire. The house came alive with sound. Operators fanned out through the lower level, clearing each room. Maya moved toward the right passage, where a reinforced door stood closed. Jonah's voice buzzed through the channel. "We've got thermal anomalies. Check your corners. Possible booby traps." "Understood," Maya said. She crouched beside the door and swept the floor. A faint shimmer reflected off a hair-thin filament crossing just above the threshold. "Tripwire, barely visible." "Manual breach," she said, waving Garrison forward. "Bypass the threshold and wedge from the base." It took less than a minute. The door gave way under the force of a hydraulic spreader, revealing a back room lined with whiteboards, maps, and a single steel desk covered in hard drives, flash modules, and coded paperwork. In the center of the room, scrawled across one board in looping marker, was a diagram linking state precincts to individual officer names, lines connecting major metro departments to small rural towns, forming a lattice of complicity. "This is it," Maya said. "This is their structure." She grabbed the primary hard drive, tucked it into her vest pouch, and snapped images of the board with her tactical cam. Behind her, Garrison kept watch at the door. A muffled explosion rang out from upstairs. The lights flickered, then surged back. "Jonah!" she barked into the comms. No response. She turned and ran for the stairs, Garrison behind her. The gunfire upstairs had turned heavier. Automatic now. Sustained. As she reached the second floor, the hallway bloomed with smoke and the acrid scent of burnt circuitry. An operator lay against the wall, alive but unconscious, his leg bleeding from a grazing shot. Maya dropped beside him for half a second, checked his pulse, then pushed forward. At the far end of the hall, Jonah was crouched against a flipped table, his tablet sparking on the floor beside him. Blood stained his left shoulder, where a bullet had clipped through the flesh. "I'm good," he muttered as she reached him, though his face was pale. "They had a fallback switch. Tried to fry the network node as I breached it. Took out half their own comms and nearly took my arm with it." Maya pressed a gauze pack to the wound and barked for evac. Garrison's voice came through. "Southeast corridor clear. Package secure. Recommend immediate extraction." "No," Maya said, standing over Jonah. "We're not leaving yet." She looked back toward the intel room, at the web of names and cities written in deliberate strokes. The entire network was there, coded but mapped. "This doesn't end with one building, and we're not finished pulling them apart." She moved fast through the smoke-filled hallway, past the operator dragging Jonah toward the extraction corridor, rifle up and eyes scanning the half-open doors lining the second floor. Every footfall felt louder than it was, muffled only by the sporadic burst of suppressed gunfire below and the sharp crack of return fire from somewhere behind the staircase. A voice shouted from the West Hall. Male, clipped, panicked. "Back room! He's moving toward the escape tunnel." Maya rounded the corner without hesitation. Aisha was already there, crouched near a downed operator whose shoulder bled freely into the floorboards. In front of them stood a splintered doorway. Inside, the last corner of the Crimson House not yet cleared. Two operatives breached first, slicing into the room with methodical precision. The space was dim, lit only by an overturned lamp, but the sound of scraping against metal gave them their direction. A square panel in the far wall had been dislodged, kicked open with visible force, revealing a dark chute leading down into the earth. "Tunnel confirmed," Aisha called out. "Two suspects inside. One's armed." "Flash and follow," Maya ordered. A stun grenade arced into the tunnel entrance, detonating with a concussive burst. A second later, the team dropped in. The house shook faintly under the force of it. From the ground floor came more shouting. Another operator reporting additional hostiles breaching from a hidden crawl space beneath the west wing. Maya stormed downstairs, boots thudding against the worn wood steps as the tempo of the raid shifted from strategic precision to close-quarters brawl. One suspect, wearing partial tactical gear, bolted across the hall with a modified rifle. He turned mid-sprint and fired blind toward the rear entry. Aisha returned fire from the stairwell, her shots catching him in the thigh and hip. He collapsed mid-motion, still moving, trying to reach a detonator clipped to his belt. Maya was on him before he could activate it. She stepped over the twitching man, drove her boot into his wrist with a controlled stomp, then tore the device free and hurled it across the room. Her side flared with pain, but she didn't slow. Two operators rushed in behind her and restrained the man, yanking his arms back with mechanical efficiency. "Bag him," Maya said. "And don't be gentle." By the time they swept the rest of the house, 4 suspects had been restrained. 3 alive and bleeding. 1 unconscious from a collapsed airway after resisting arrest. Another 2 were still unaccounted for, having disappeared down the tunnel before Maya's team could follow. The passage had run cold 20 meters out, splintering into a dry creek bed on the other side of the ridge, where getaway vehicles had likely been staged. They'd vanished without a trace. Outside, the air was thicker now, weighed down by the smell of gunpowder, sweat, and disturbed earth. The team had set up a temporary perimeter, and the Crimson House's once-sealed compound was now a ruin of broken windows, smashed furniture, and shattered illusions. Near the shed, 2 field medics were wrapping thermal blankets around the children. A girl no older than 7 and a boy, maybe 9, both wide-eyed but quiet. The woman with them, a schoolteacher abducted 6 days earlier from a town outside Lexington, gave her statement with a vacant stare and a trembling voice. They hadn't been beaten, but they had been shown things, taught things, images, recordings, language none of them should have heard. The trauma wouldn't fade quickly. Maya stepped beside the boy, crouched low, and spoke gently. "Do you know who brought you here?" He nodded once, almost imperceptibly. "Did they give you a name?" His lips trembled before he whispered it. "Colonel Shepard." Maya didn't react outwardly, but the cold in her chest deepened. She thanked him, stood, and walked back toward the house, the name repeating in her mind like a bell tolling through smoke. Colonel Shepard. The pseudonym wasn't unfamiliar. It had surfaced in chatter before, buried in militia forums, woven into paranoid message boards. A rumored architect. No confirmed photo, no confirmed origin. Inside the command room, Garrison had recovered the remaining hard drives and powered down the makeshift server hub. The room was littered with tactical maps, recruitment printouts, and training rosters. A single laptop had survived the firefight, shielded under a broken desk. Maya opened it. The login screen had already been bypassed. Jonah's remote protocol had done its job before the EMP discharge disabled the second-floor relay. One folder stood out. Doctrine. She opened it. What spilled onto the screen was worse than she expected. Names. Not code words. Real names. Active duty officers, deputies, detectives. From Ohio, Virginia, Missouri, Florida. Files tagged by rank, assignment, and alignment risk. Attached photos showed officers in uniform, smiling for ID badges. In other images, they posed in paramilitary gear, some wearing armbands, others holding banners marked with SO, Sentinels of Order. A second file, deeper, contained strategic projections. Maya scrolled through predictive simulations of civil unrest scenarios, categorized by trigger type: officer-involved shooting, militia rally dispersal, federal protest response. It wasn't theory. It was planning. She tapped a third folder. Command. And there it was. Clayton Reese. She stared at the name, the attached records displaying a military service file marked Retired Colonel, United States Army, Special Operations, Psychological Warfare Division, Honorable Discharge, multiple commendations, a citation for restraint under fire. But the last note in the personnel file was dated nearly 15 years ago. After that, nothing. No forwarding address, no veterans' claims, no federal employment, just silence. Then a photo loaded. A candid shot, low resolution, likely taken from a drone or long-range surveillance lens. It showed Reese standing near a burned-out barn, cigarette in hand, face weathered and deliberate. In the background, a truck. Parked beside it was Mathers. Maya didn't blink. Her hand curled slowly into a fist. He wasn't just a pawn. He was part of the command structure. The uniform had never left him. It had only changed colors. From the hallway, Aisha appeared, rifle slung over her back. We got names. 2 of the detained cracked under pressure. Most of them don't even know each other. Compartmentalized. One of them said they only ever answered to Shepard. Maya nodded once, eyes still locked on the photo. We were tracking corruption in departments. But this isn't corruption. She tapped the screen once, closing the file. This is occupation. The data was too clean, too complete, and too damning for the upper levels of Homeland Security to react with anything resembling courage. Within 24 hours of the Crimson House raid, Maya's secure briefing package, encrypted, tagged with validated chain of custody timestamps, and backed by audiovisual confirmation, had been routed through the appropriate channels, uploaded to a classified DTRA node under flag priority. She expected the response to be swift, decisive. She expected calls, task force mobilization, a new umbrella operation with federal teeth. What she got instead was a 5-line message marked internal use only. Report acknowledged. Case file referred to oversight. Do not engage further pending review. A day later, her mission credentials were revoked. She read the order from the sterile corner of a secure facility in Maryland, seated at a terminal she wasn't even supposed to still have access to. The red banner at the top of the screen flashed, "Restricted. Authorization revoked," but the data remained. She wasn't locked out yet. Someone up the chain had likely stalled the purge, hoping she'd let it go quietly. Aisha stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "They're burying it." "They're trying to," Maya replied, without looking away. The moment we confirmed Reese's involvement, it stopped being about infiltration and started being about exposure. He's not just a rogue vet. He's a war hero. His name is still hanging in one of the buildings at Fort Bragg. "He's sheltering a domestic terror cell," Aisha said flatly. "He's radicalizing cops. That flag doesn't cover that." "They're betting the public won't know the difference," Maya replied. She reached into her pocket and removed a slim burner drive. On it were the unfiltered versions of the Crimson House logs, names, faces, precincts, and recorded exchanges. Not enough to arrest, but more than enough to start a war on narrative. She placed it into a black envelope and sealed it. The handwriting on the label was deliberate. Detective Carla Montenegro. Eyes only. Aisha gave her a look, not quite questioning but cautious. "She's good. But you know what happens once you light that fuse." "I'm counting on it." Montenegro received the package in a parking garage 4 levels beneath the city. She said nothing when she opened it. She made no calls, signed no forms, and filed no official reports. But within 12 hours, an internal affairs bulletin flagged Officer Kyle Mathers as non-responsive to administrative request. By the next morning, he was officially marked missing. Maya wasn't surprised. He'd vanished the way trained assets do, quietly, surgically, with help. Surveillance footage showed his cruiser abandoned near the Maryland state line, stripped of radio, laptop, and badge. The final GPS ping came from a truck stop, where 2 other officers, names from Maya's Sentinel list, had been sighted 3 weeks prior. After that, no trace. He'd burned his way out. Jonah, working from his recovery bed with one arm in a sling and a cooling unit strapped to his shoulder, intercepted chatter from a mesh net designed to avoid federal keywords. His voice over the line was hoarse but sharp. "They're moving assets west. Reese has a new staging zone." Maya leaned over her monitor. "Where?" "Montana." "You're not going to like the location." "Try me." 10 years ago, it was a National Guard training camp. Remote, shielded, and equipped for backcountry operations. After it was decommissioned, it was sold to a private foundation connected to a security consultancy. Guess who used to sit on their board? Maya didn't need to hear the name. She already knew. Jonah continued. "They're calling it Black Hollow now. No power grid, no service. The kind of place you vanish into." "And Reese?" "Seen twice in the last 2 weeks. One drone flyover caught him walking perimeter. Beard's longer, posture's slower, but it's him. And he's not alone. Vehicle movement suggests multiple adult males on site. Militia patterns. No visible insignia." Maya pulled up the grainy aerial photo. Reese stood beside a generator unit, clipboard in hand. Behind him, a barn converted into a makeshift barracks. It looked like a survivalist compound, but the way he stood, feet set, weight forward, eyes scanning the horizon, told her everything she needed to know. He wasn't retreating. He was fortifying. "Anything on Mathers?" Jonah exhaled. Last signal pinged a burner tied to the same relay used by Reese's handlers in the South Carolina incident 3 months ago. Then it went dark. Best guess, he's already made contact and been absorbed into the compound. Aisha leaned over from the far side of the room. "You think Reese is building something again?" "I think he never stopped." Maya closed the file and stood. The system had made its choice. The names on those lists weren't accidents. They were placeholders for a larger design, one that intended to replicate itself across jurisdictions, inside institutions, protected by badges and camouflage, and the silence of frightened bureaucrats. "We'll need long-range surveillance," she said. "Thermal and signal sweeps. Drone rotations on 12-hour intervals. Jonah, can you keep this off-grid? I can route it through a ghost net in Reykjavik. But if you poke too hard, they'll know someone's watching." "Good," she said, voice steady. "Let them feel it." There was no applause, no authorization, no legal cover. But there was purpose. The drone lifted over the foothills at dawn, its whispering rotors fading behind the rise of tall pine and scrub-covered ridge. It arced once, found altitude, and turned south by southwest, banking toward coordinates flagged in a folder marked Reese, Tactical Footprint, Phase 3. Below, the Black Hollow compound stirred to life. Men in civilian tactical gear emerged from tents and temporary housing. Some patrolled. Others practiced small arms drills on the open field beyond the barn. Near the center of the compound stood a watchtower, newly built, outfitted with infrared and manually mounted optics. From the top of the tower, a man stood staring toward the trees. He didn't wave. He didn't flinch. He just watched. Reese hadn't gone into hiding. He was preparing for something. And Maya, now fully unshackled from her former chain of command, was preparing too. The clip surfaced 2 days after the last confirmed drone pass over Black Hollow. It came from an anonymous account on a private video hosting service, but within 12 hours it had been downloaded, reshared, embedded, and quoted by enough known disinformation amplifiers that the damage was already irreversible. The footage was grainy, supposedly leaked body cam footage. Maya, in uniform, standing outside a cruiser, shouting at 2 white officers in the rain. Her voice was loud, her posture aggressive. She could be heard saying, clearly and unmistakably, "You think I won't shoot first if you so much as blink wrong?" The video cut quickly after that, ending on a freeze frame of her face contorted with anger, badge glinting on her shoulder, and one hand hovering near her hip as if about to draw a weapon. The title read, "Federal Agent Threatens Local Police. Leaked by Brave Whistleblower." By the time Maya saw the clip, it had already hit syndicated late-night broadcasts and anonymous police forums. The thumbnail was stamped with a bold red banner, "Proof of Extremism in Federal Ranks." She watched it twice, once with the sound on, once without. The lighting was wrong. Her uniform was authentic, but dated by several years. The cruiser behind her was a model she had never driven. The voice? Almost perfect, but too flat in the vowels, too clean in the consonants. And then there was the final frame, the glint at her hip. It wasn't her weapon. It wasn't even regulation issue. Aisha paced behind her, arms crossed tightly over her chest. They're going wide with it. No direct platform push, just enough to spark the fire, then let the crowd carry it. "It'll work," Maya said, calm but not cold. "They've seeded just enough doubt that even the people on our side will hesitate." and the rest will jump. She wasn't wrong. By noon the next day, police protests had erupted in 4 major cities, union chapters calling for her arrest, demanding an investigation into what they called federal intimidation and unauthorized oversight on domestic law enforcement. Her file was pulled. Someone leaked a redacted portion of her service history. News commentators latched onto the words psyops and counterinfiltration like gasoline on a fuse. A retired sheriff on a podcast called her a rogue agent with an anti-cop agenda. One elected official went further, naming her directly in a floor speech and urging the Justice Department to issue a warrant. It came at 6:17 a.m., hand-delivered to an administrative court in Northern Virginia. Writ of federal detention. Maya Trenton. Charges: abuse of authority, intimidation of law enforcement, obstruction of justice. By the time her former allies received word, Maya was already gone. The safe house in West Virginia was old, stripped of furniture, and wired with 3 fail-safes and 2 exit tunnels. It was a fallback location she hadn't used in 5 years, one of a handful only she and Jonah knew. Aisha had brought in a few supplies: clean gear, analog tools, a burner system rigged to intercept local wireless frequencies. Montenegro arrived after sunset, hair pulled into a tight bun, eyes shadowed by the risk she was taking just by being seen near Maya. "We've got a window," she said, without preamble, sliding a flash drive onto the table. I traced the metadata. Maya took the drive. "You're sure?" "It's not subtle," Montenegro said. "Whoever rendered that video didn't scrub the final export container. There's a timecode embedded in the .mp4 header that doesn't match the supposed timestamp on the badgecam overlay. It was rendered 3 days before it was leaked." "And the raw footage?" Jonah asked from the far side of the room, his voice dry from pain meds, but focused as ever. "Spliced from 2 prior incidents, one in Tulsa, one in Alabama. Both involved women, both body cams flagged for internal review. Deepfake overlay did the rest." "But here's the kicker." Montenegro paused, then tapped her tablet. "The editing suite used? Proprietary. Originally licensed to a defense contractor who operated under the Reese Foundation 5 years ago. It was sold off before the nonprofit dissolved, but not before one of their technicians created a black market rendering engine. Same signature, same filters." Maya didn't smile. She didn't need to. "Get it to the press," she said. Aisha raised a brow. "You sure? We can't wait for a federal investigation to exonerate me. They've already decided I'm more valuable as a villain. But if we show the public where it came from, how it was made, how it links back to Reese, they'll start asking questions the government can't shut down." Montenegro nodded. "I'll route it through a whistleblower channel. I've got 2 journalists who've already taken heat for challenging the narrative. They'll run it clean." Over the next 48 hours, Maya stayed offline. She didn't check feeds, didn't review coverage. She let the data do the talking. The leak spread first on independent platforms, then on verified digital forensics forums. Analysts picked it apart frame by frame, each one confirming the manipulation, the editing discrepancies, the rendering timestamps. By day 3, one news outlet ran the headline, "Whistleblower exposes deepfake smear campaign targeting decorated Army colonel." By day 4, Homeland Security issued a statement reviewing the authenticity of new evidence provided by independent investigators. They didn't apologize, but they blinked. Montenegro called just after midnight. "It's moving. They're not ready to admit fault, but they've rescinded the arrest warrant. It's in internal purgatory now." Maya said nothing for a long moment, watching the screen in front of her cycle through captured drone images of Black Hollow. Reese was still there, still moving, still building. "The minute I surface, they'll try again," she said. "So I won't." Aisha leaned on the table beside her. Then, what's the next move? Maya stared at the newest image, a fresh security tower under construction near the compound's western ridge. We hit him before he finishes whatever he's building, before the next phase. No leaks, no headlines. We end it. The screen darkened as the program cycled into standby. The only light in the room came from the burn of low-level night vision screens and the amber glow of a filtered desk lamp. In the shadows of her own country, hunted and falsely accused, Maya Trenton had never been more certain of her purpose. And somewhere in the hills, Reese was about to discover what it meant to try and erase someone who had nothing left to lose. The satellite image came through just before dawn, time-stamped, geo-locked, and verified across 3 independent constellations. It showed a private airstrip carved into the edge of an old farming basin north of Calaveras County, tucked into a tree line that hadn't seen official use in over a decade. There was no official flight plan, no registered manifest, but parked on the runway was a turboprop twin-engine Gulfstream, fully fueled and taxi-ready. And standing beside it, unmistakable even in low-res thermal, were 2 men, one tall and lean, posture stiff like an old habit, Clayton Reese, and the other with his hand on a duffel bag, his stance restless, like someone waiting for escape, Kyle Mathers. Maya stared at the screen for a long moment without speaking. The signal came from a repurposed weather satellite Aisha had jacked into using one of Jonah's ghost node protocols. The image wasn't official, which meant it wasn't bound by any reporting lines. It was theirs, clean and untraceable. Aisha leaned over her shoulder. "You think they're bugging out?" "No," Maya replied. "Reese doesn't run. He relocates. Mathers is the one running. Reese is just putting him where he wants him next." Jonah chimed in from the secondary monitor, pale under the glow of multiple feeds. "We intercepted encrypted routing from a Colombian backchannel used by mercenary logistics 2 years ago, matching this strip's location. Somebody arranged clearance through a Panamanian port, civilian registry, diplomatic clearance likely forged. And once Mathers gets on that plane, he's gone," Aisha said, voice tightening. Maya's tone remained level. "Then we don't let him get on." She pushed back from the terminal and stood, her body stiff with purpose. "Pull up everything we've got on the strip. Terrain, layout, response time from local agencies. We hit it quiet, fast, and legal." Aisha gave her a look, half surprised. "Legal? I want warrants in hand. I want jurisdiction. I want an official record this time." The assembly was fast but surgical. Aisha coordinated with 2 former NIS agents who still operated in a gray zone under retired credentials. Montenegro made a call to a federal magistrate she'd once saved from a political ambush. 1 sealed warrant, retroactive and time-stamped. Jonah passed off surveillance intel to a secure DOJ node that flagged Mathers as a material witness in an ongoing internal corruption case. It was enough to create a legal thread, thin but intact. The rest of the team came from old ghosts, people who had worked beside Maya before the political tides changed. Ex-CIA, ex-military intelligence, digital recon specialists who lived behind firewalls and answered to no one unless they chose to. She didn't give them orders. She gave them purpose. That was enough. By nightfall, they had boots on the ground and satellite overwatch. The strip was dark, no external lights, just reflective markers along the edges and 2 halogen rigs near the storage hangar. The plane sat dormant, hatch open. Inside, fuel tanks were already engaged. "We've got 12 minutes before full clearance expires on that warrant," Jonah said from the van outside the perimeter. "After that, we're in the weeds. Then we move," Maya said. The convoy peeled off the access road just outside the tree line. They moved silent. 3 SUVs with their lights blacked out. engine noise dampened by mod kits installed years ago for operations exactly like this. A separate drone hovered above, feeding real-time thermal to Maya's headset. Reese and Mathers were both still present. Two armed guards flanked the plane's ramp. "Drop the ramp guard. Go for disablement, not kill," Maya said through comms. "Intercept before wheels up. We need Mathers alive." The strike team moved like a blade. Quick, clean, synchronized. Suppressed rounds popped into the night as the guards were dropped with non-lethal hits to the knee and collar. One went down screaming. The other hit the tarmac with a choked grunt and stayed down. Maya sprinted forward, covering the last 40 meters as the rear hatch of the plane swung wide. Mathers appeared in the opening, eyes wide, gun already drawn. He saw her, and for a fraction of a second, recognition cracked through his panic. He fired first, clumsy, rushed, poorly aimed, but it was close. The shot sliced past her cheekbone, the heat of it brushing her skin like a warning. She didn't flinch. Her feet were already in motion, the distance between them evaporating as she surged up the ramp with controlled fury. Mathers tried to fire again, but his wrist was already being caught, twisted sideways with a brutal snap. The weapon clattered down the metal ramp, spinning once before vanishing into the dark. He threw his other elbow toward her face, but she ducked, drove her knee into his gut, and slammed him against the bulkhead of the plane. "You shouldn't be alive," he spat, breathless. "I watched you bleed out." "You're not the first man who's underestimated me," she said, her voice low and cold. "But you might be the last." He drove his forehead into hers. The crack of bone against bone made stars burst across her vision. But she didn't fall back. She grabbed his collar, yanked him forward, and slammed his head into the side wall. He staggered, grunted, but kept swinging. His training was military, disciplined, but rage had replaced precision. He was sloppy now, vicious, not tactical. He landed a punch that split her lip. She returned it with a palm strike to his throat. He choked, stumbled, grabbed a fire extinguisher from its mount and swung it. She rolled under it, came up inside his reach, and drove her elbow into his chin with all the force she could summon. His head snapped back, blood spraying from his mouth, but he stayed standing, hands scrambling toward his boot. She saw the blade an instant before it came loose. A 6-inch combat knife, sharpened to a reflective edge. "Don't!" she warned. "You don't give orders anymore," he snarled. "You're nothing now. Just a bleeding heart wrapped in armor that doesn't protect you." He lunged. She sidestepped, grabbed his wrist, and twisted hard. The blade cut across her forearm, sharp, shallow, enough to sting but not stop her. She spun, used his momentum against him, and slammed him backward into the wall. The blade clattered to the floor. He didn't stop. Even bleeding, even stunned, he lunged again, this time trying to tackle her to the floor. They hit the steel deck hard, rolled once, twice. He tried to pin her, hands at her throat, weight pressing down, but her legs came up, braced against his rib cage, and she heaved. He flew backward, slammed into the ramp railing, staggered upright with a scream of pure rage. "You ruined everything," he shouted. "We were cleaning the rot. We were taking it back." "You were the rot," she said. And then she moved, fast, silent, surgical. She kicked the inside of his knee. It gave with a wet pop. He dropped, shrieking, and she closed in, wrapped his own arm around his throat, and forced him into a submission hold so tight he started to convulse. "No more speeches," she hissed. "No more videos. No more lies." His fingers clawed at her sleeve, but it was too late. He blacked out in 15 seconds, slumped fully by 20. When she let him go, he hit the floor hard, unconscious, drooling, twitching faintly. She stared down at him for a long moment, chest heaving, the pain in her lip, her arm, her jaw all buzzing like electric wires under her skin. Her blood dripped onto the ramp. She didn't care. She tapped her comm. "Mathers down. Alive. Cuffed in 30 seconds. Aisha's voice answered immediately. "Copy. Reese is in the wind. We've got movement at the east tree line. Vehicle. Jonah's painting it now." "Handle it," Maya said. "I'll secure him." She pulled a pair of flex cuffs from her vest, flipped Mathers onto his stomach, and bound his wrists with deliberate, grinding tightness. He groaned softly, half-conscious, barely breathing. "You shot me once," she whispered near his ear. "You won't get a second." She stood, lips bloodied, arms still bleeding, and watched as the drone's strike in the distance lit up the horizon. Reese's final escape plan evaporating in a bloom of fire and steel. Smoke still curled upward from the mangled SUV, its frame gutted and blackened where the drone's payload had carved a crescent of fire through the east tree line. The air was thick with heat and scorched rubber. Maya moved quickly across the debris-strewn grass, the rifle steady in her grip, eyes cutting through the smoke as the soft whine of stabilizing rotors drifted in overhead. Reese had crawled from the wreckage, his right leg dragging uselessly behind him, and now he was slipping into the remains of a shattered maintenance building at the airfield's edge. Low concrete, half-roofed, the kind of place built for hiding or dying. Jonah's voice cut in, cool and fast through comms. "Thermal shows him bleeding but moving. He's armed, something short barrel. No eyes inside the structure." "Hold the perimeter," Maya said, already weaving through the gaps between wreckage and cinderblock. "He's mine." She reached the opening in the wall just as the last echo of the explosion died, her shadow falling across the broken threshold. Inside, the dark bled around overturned shelves and old equipment, dust rising in lazy plumes as her boots slid across the grit-covered floor. Reese's breathing was the first thing she heard, low, labored, but controlled, coming from behind a column of stacked barrels. He knew she was there. 58 kills in the desert. His voice called out, calm, half-mocking. 3 tours, 7 commendations. They gave me medals for doing half of what they want to court-martial you for. Maya advanced, slow, quiet, rifle angled low, sweeping the corners of the room with the precision of a surgeon. "And what did you do with all that credibility, Reese? You built a network of cowards who hide behind flags and children. You don't see it, do you?" he called back, his voice shifting closer. "This country doesn't need saving. It needs remembering. I just gave it the tools to do it. By planting terrorists in uniforms?" she snapped. "By turning every badge into a loaded threat?" He emerged fast, from the left, shoulder first, barreling into her with all the force his broken body could muster. Her rifle went skidding across the concrete. They hit the floor in a blur of limbs and pain. He tried to mount her, but she drove her knee into his side and rolled, slamming his back into the crates with a thud that rattled the metal siding. His fist caught her across the jaw. Once, then again. She tasted blood and kept going. She brought her elbow down hard across his forearm as he swung again, then twisted under his center of gravity and brought him crashing to the floor. He rolled with it, trying to recover, crawling toward the Glock he'd hidden beneath a ragged canvas tarp. She dove after him, caught his ankle, yanked, and dragged him back, just as his fingers grazed the grip. "You were never the cure," she growled, forcing his chest to the concrete, her forearm pinning his throat. "You were the infection." He slammed his head back into hers. Pain exploded across her forehead, but she didn't release him. She wrapped her legs around his and locked him down, her breath hot and ragged in his ear. He shifted suddenly, flipped her over, broke half free, and lunged, not for the Glock this time, but a rusted pry bar by the wall. He swung once, missing wide, steel clanging off the floor, then adjusted and came in tighter. She ducked under the arc, grabbed his wrist with both hands, twisted it hard enough to pop the joint, and brought her boot up into his stomach. He dropped the bar, gasping, but tried to keep fighting, even now, even bleeding and broken, and already lost. "This isn't war anymore, Colonel," she said, her voice seething. "You don't get to rewrite the mission." He lunged again, a final effort, a desperate, snarling, prideful motion. She sidestepped, caught him by the collar, spun, and threw him headlong into the support beam. He collapsed, coughing blood. Maya stood over him, panting, bruised, and bleeding. He looked up through red-stained teeth, smiling faintly. "You think this ends with me?" "No," she said, pulling the cuffs from her belt. "It ends with every last one of you." She cuffed him where he fell. His wrists pulled back behind the beam, the metal biting into his skin. He sagged forward, breathing shallow, a heap of hate and failure bound to the steel skeleton of a forgotten building. Outside, rotor wash stirred the smoke into a wide gray shroud. Inside, Maya activated her mic. "Target secure. Reese is down and cuffed. Send the team in." "Copy," came the reply. "On your mark." Maya didn't look back at him as the shadows moved in. He was done. The ideology would wither, the cells would scatter, and the rest of his traitorous network would fall, because now there were names, files, evidence, and witnesses who weren't afraid to speak anymore. And Maya Trenton, standing in the rubble of their last sanctuary, wasn't afraid of anything they had left. Reese didn't speak again during transport. He sat chained to the bench mount of the extraction chopper, eyes unfocused, blood congealing at the edge of his mouth. Maya sat opposite him, arms crossed, lips split, dried blood forming a crescent across her temple. She never looked away. Even when the wind shifted or the drone escort passed overhead, she kept her eyes locked on him, not out of fear, not even anger, but certainty. Jonah had already begun processing the data package seized from Crimson House. It hadn't just confirmed the names. They'd found organizational flowcharts, duty rosters, funding chains tied to shell nonprofits, internal memos passed through encrypted precinct channels. It wasn't a theory anymore. It was fact, cold and prosecutable. By the time they landed at the secure facility just outside Arlington, Homeland Security was already on site, grim-faced, clearly ordered to contain, but too late to bury anything. The footage had already leaked. Montenegro had made sure of that, transmitting key files through whistleblower relays and activist channels. Public discourse had flipped overnight. For every headline screaming conspiracy, 2 others ran breakdowns of verified evidence. No one could hide behind just a few bad apples anymore. Reese was transferred under full guard into an off-the-books interrogation suite, built for wartime intelligence, not domestic procedure. Maya insisted on being present. She didn't ask permission. She didn't need it. The room was quiet, except for the soft hum of the surveillance array. Reese sat across from her, still cuffed, his fingers twitching slightly as if still reaching for control that no longer existed. His wounds had been treated. Barely. The bandages were functional, not compassionate. "You lost," Maya said evenly, not leaning forward, not posturing. "But you still get to choose how loud the end of this story is." Reese looked up, eyes dull but not empty. "I didn't lose. I just finished my part." Maya nodded once, absorbing it without blinking. "Then we'll make sure the next part never gets written." They sat in silence after that. He didn't cooperate. He didn't need to. The files were already damning. The network had cracked open like a rusted pipe under pressure. Most of the Crimson House detainment group had turned under questioning, especially once they realized how quickly the Department of Justice had moved to prosecute under terrorism enhancement clauses. Some cried, some raged, a few tried to posture like martyrs. None of it mattered. The system they thought would protect them had already begun retreating, disavowing, discarding them as liabilities. Mathers had been processed separately, kept isolated to prevent cross-contamination of testimony. Maya didn't see him again until the hearing prep weeks later. By then, the bruises had faded, but the damage remained visible in the way he moved, tighter, stiffer, less certain of his own invincibility. He was no longer the arrogant man who had fired into her chest that night. He was a defendant now, stripped of rank, stripped of brotherhood, facing not just the law, but the judgment of a country watching through courtroom feeds and investigative broadcasts. His attorney tried to argue chain of command confusion. Maya's recording, the blinking red light that never stopped, rendered that argument obsolete. When she took the stand, the courtroom was silent. No coughs, no rustling papers, just cameras and eyes and the weight of what had been done. She didn't perform, she didn't sermonize. She recounted every detail of that traffic stop with surgical clarity, outlined the timeline of the infiltration, detailed the consequences of a network that had wrapped itself in flags and shields and used them to erase accountability. "I'm not here to vilify uniforms," she said, her voice clear and unshaken. "I wore one too. But uniforms don't sanctify you. Oaths don't erase intent. And patriotism isn't silence." She walked off the stand without looking at Mathers. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. He was found guilty on all counts: aggravated assault, attempted murder, conspiracy to commit domestic terrorism. Reese's case, though slower, was heavier. The charges spanned state and federal jurisdictions. His history, once lauded, now read like a cautionary tale. His own words, pulled from encrypted chats and meeting transcriptions, painted a portrait of manipulation so chilling that even former allies distanced themselves within hours of the leaks. He would spend the rest of his life in a black site, processed under the domestic insurgency statutes that hadn't been publicly invoked in decades. And still, Maya didn't celebrate. She sat with Aisha in a quiet room the night after the sentencing, watching the headlines cycle on muted screens. Analysis, shock, backlash, re-evaluation. The country was struggling to digest the truth, but for the first time, it wasn't turning away. Aisha passed her a folder, sealed, official, unsigned. "What's this?" Maya asked. "Final closure packet," Aisha said. "Everything tied up. They're asking if you want reinstatement, or retirement, or—" "I'm not done," Maya said, eyes never leaving the window. "I figured." She didn't need a title. The work would go on, quieter maybe, but relentless. The damage would take years to heal, but she'd made sure it couldn't be ignored anymore. Outside, the sun began to rise over the Potomac, and for the first time since the night she was pulled from her car, Maya Trenton felt the weight in her chest begin to lift. Not because the war was over, but because the silence around it was finally broken. Weeks passed, not with silence or ceremony, but with the kind of restless, turbulent momentum that builds only when hard truths claw their way to the surface and refuse to be buried again. There were no tidy endings, no uniform statements issued by the departments that had allowed the rot to fester in their ranks. What emerged instead was something louder, messier, and far more necessary. A public unmasking of the systems that had worn patriotism like armor and used its shine to hide the blood beneath. The footage of the traffic stop that nearly ended Maya's life, once encrypted and locked away behind layers of departmental firewalls and classified tags, was now required viewing in police reform seminars, federal agency audits, and military intelligence briefings. The once shielded recording, with its unbroken audio, the blink of that quiet red LED, and the unmistakable silence of authority turned predatory, had become undeniable. No voiceover could explain it away. No legal team could spin the clarity of intent etched into every gesture, every dismissive command, every bullet. And then came the footage from Crimson House, heavily redacted, released in fragments, but potent nonetheless. What it showed was not a rogue unit or an isolated cell, but something deeply organized and deeply American. Training formations, coordinated tactics, communication protocols mimicking law enforcement ops. The testimonies that followed were no longer whispered from anonymous sources. They came from officers, analysts, and low-level infiltrators who had once believed in the mission, and now found themselves at the center of a war they hadn't fully understood. Maya didn't stand at any podiums. She refused every interview request, declined every carefully worded invitation to appear on national panels. She understood all too well how easily public narrative could devour the truth and repurpose it for profit or performance. She had no interest in becoming anyone's face of justice. This was never about optics or redemption arcs. It had been about survival, exposure, and dismantling the quiet machinery that had nearly erased her life without hesitation or consequence. She had done what she came to do, and now, standing in the shadows of its aftermath, she was ready for what came next. The office in Anacostia didn't look like much, tucked between a long-abandoned grocery store with boarded windows and a nonprofit literacy center whose hours were posted in faded vinyl letters. There was no official signage, no front desk, just a single glass door with a matte black tint and a security lock wired to respond only to her badge, though she hadn't worn her uniform in months. Inside, dust danced in golden shafts of late morning light as it cut through the half-closed blinds, pooling across old tile floors and half-assembled workstations. Aisha sat at the far end of the room, perched sideways on her chair, feet balanced on the edge of a scuffed metal filing cabinet. She was reading through a digital casebook, her expression unreadable but focused, as always, as if absorbing data were just another kind of combat stance. "They're calling it the Reckoning Act now," she said without glancing up. "Emergency Oversight Authority for flagged precincts, civilian monitoring panels, independent reporting chains. Basically, the whole system scrambling to look like it's evolving." Maya dropped her bag near the back wall, rolling one shoulder, then the other, the motion slow and careful, as though she were still carrying the impact of months of violence just beneath the surface. "Oversight doesn't erase intent," she said, voice low but firm. "It just reins it in." "Still better than pretending nothing happened," Aisha replied, setting the tablet aside. "You didn't just rattle them. You cracked the facade. You made them look at themselves." Maya crossed to the window, hands resting on the sill as she watched the street below. Across the road, the schoolyard was alive with motion. Kids shouting, chasing one another, tossing their backpacks across benches. Parents waited at the curb. A crossing guard waved with exaggerated authority. And for a moment, the whole block felt like a scene from a city that hadn't yet discovered how fragile peace could be. She wondered, not for the first time, what kind of world those children were growing into, whether they'd be taught to fear lights in the rear-view mirror, whether they'd be told someday that their safety depended on silence, on compliance, on a kind of obedience that had nothing to do with law and everything to do with survival. "They're asking if you'll testify again," Aisha said behind her. "Different committee this time, Senate Judiciary. They want a public statement." Maya didn't speak right away. She watched a young boy climb the iron fence, get scolded by his older sister, and drop back down without protest. Then, if I go in again, it won't be behind a closed panel. No sealed transcripts. No pre-cleared questions. They want answers. They get all of it. Aisha gave a single nod, her voice quieter now. That's what I told them. Across the room, the office printer began to hum, a low mechanical sound that felt somehow louder in the silence. Jonah had rigged the network from his recovery compound in North Carolina, tying in through a staggered mesh of firewalled proxies and passive net listeners. The system was scanning everything: new message chains, encrypted chat rooms, dormant IPs sparking back to life. The work hadn't ended with the arrests. It had only evolved. The network hadn't been dismantled, just cracked. And Maya knew too well that rot didn't die in daylight. It waited. Carla Montenegro had stepped into her new title like someone walking into a gunfight, with full awareness of the crosshairs. She was now Special Inspector under the freshly authorized Civil Internal Inquiry Task Force, a job built not for applause, but for excavation. Her first call to Maya had come late, hesitant, almost reluctant. But it only took 2 words to say everything that needed saying. "We're in." Mathers had appealed his conviction. The court dismissed it without deliberation. Reese was still awaiting final sentencing, locked away in a facility buried so deep in the system's gray areas it barely existed on paper. From his cell, he issued letters, long, self-righteous essays thinly disguised as reflections. In truth, nothing more than bile disguised as ideology. They didn't trend. No one quoted them. The echo chamber he had built had collapsed inward, and the silence that followed was deafening. Somewhere within that quiet, Maya had begun planning again. Not for vengeance, not for another raid, but for something far more deliberate. She wasn't interested in creating a counterweight to extremism anymore. She intended to cut out the space where it thrived, to strip it of the shadows, the permission, the illusion that it belonged to anything noble. When the knock came, 3 sharp raps at the glass door. It barely startled her. The young woman standing outside couldn't have been more than 22. Her clothes were neat, her posture guarded, and the folder pressed against her chest looked more like a burden than a delivery. "You Trenton?" she asked, the words catching slightly in her throat. "I am," Maya said, holding the door open. "My brother, he was in Westlock," the girl said, her eyes shifting away, then back again. "He left the department after the Crimson raid. He gave me this a few weeks ago, told me to keep it safe. Said if anything ever happened, someone had to know the truth. I think it's yours now." Maya accepted the folder with quiet hands, opened it just enough to see the agency seal, the date, the watermark of a confidential internal report that had never been filed publicly. Names redacted, orders untouched, evidence that had been waiting for someone to care. "Thank you," she said, voice soft but unyielding. "We'll take it from here." The girl gave a small nod, then turned and walked away without another word, disappearing into the sunlit street like a ghost, fading back into a world that had almost forgotten her. Aisha was already moving to clear the scanner bay, prepping the file for full digital logging and backtraced indexing. Maya didn't follow immediately. She stood in the doorway a moment longer, eyes narrowed, watching the flow of the day outside, the movement of people who had no idea how close they had come to losing control of the world they thought they understood. Then she shut the door. The war wasn't over, but it was exposed. And that meant it could be fought now, not in secret, not on someone else's terms, not bound by red tape and silence, but out in the open, with facts, with names, with light. Maya turned back to the room, to her team, to the next set of files already blinking in the upload queue. She moved not as a fugitive, not as a soldier, not as someone broken by what had been done to her. She moved as a woman who had been pulled from her car with her hands in full view and her identity dismissed, and who had made sure, irrevocably, that they would never forget her name again. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.